Is there a truly reality out there that humans can really know? It's an age-old battle between realists and absolutists. God is not great, how religion ruins everything. And yet it's utterly and totally ridiculous. We need to live for something beyond ourselves. One day my wife sent me to the grocery store. The big question was, could I actually get it right this time? You know, get everything she asked. And that's generally a kind of iffy proposition, to say the least, if you men have ever done that. Anyway, at one point I'm going through the grocery store and I wandered into the produce section. And it was glorious. There were the grapes, there were the lemons, there were the limes, the grapefruits, the avocados, the tomatoes, the onions, the scallions, the peppers, the peaches, the pears, the plums, the tangerines, the melons, the pomegranates, the bananas, the garlic, the blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, on and on and on and on. All with most of them with their own seeds safely tucked in them, able to produce potentially, I guess, an infinite number of more of their own offspring. All of these things looking so good, smelling so good, tasting so good, and all just happening to be so good and so healthy for us. I looked at all that, and again, instantly, I was just struck by the sheer idiocy and foolishness of evolution. It's a myth, it's a joke. It's a desperate human attempt, I think, to ignore the obvious by replacing it with the absurd. Standing in that store, standing in that store, but all the scientific papers in the world, produced by all the greatest biological literati they have in the world, with their deep and profound explanations and highly referenced papers just referencing other writers, and research about what supposedly happened 150 million years ago in some shadowy pre-RNA world, could have convinced me that stuff arose by chance. They could have told me flying saucers dropped them out of the sky. That would have made more sense to me than their evolutionary model. It was just fascinating as I looked at all that. But they reject any idea. To me, I looked at that and it was so clear it was created. And yet in today's academic world, anything that hints of purpose, anything that hints of design, anything that hints of teleology or whatever, you are cross purposes with them. It's an intellectual faux pas, and you might easily lose your job if you even imply by looking at that there might have been a design or a purpose for it. And yet, I'm sorry, all that fruit, the colors, the taste, the seeds within, that's all by evolution. It's all by random mutation and natural selection and nothing else. I'm sorry, come on. I don't know, but somehow those words from Genesis, describing fruits and plants as creating their own seeds, created with them in it, made so much more, seemed so much better an explanation than what I saw. Genesis 1:29, then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. This will be yours for food. Think this through for a minute. Each plant and tree and whatever had the seed in it. The seed is already in the fruit. It was created with the tree, with the plant, the tree, the fruit, the plant, all these things were created all at once. What came first, the grapefruit or the grapefruit seed? Try to figure that out. How do you get a grapefruit without the seed? But then how do you get a seed without the grapefruit? Seems an impossible choice. In the biblical model, however, the problem's solved because you get them all at once. I don't know, doesn't just seem to make so much more sense than thinking this all occurred by chance? By chance. Richard Dawkins insists that really isn't by chance, because Richard Dawkins argues that all this came about through natural selection. And he gets adamant. He says natural selection is not chance. It's a particular process with, I guess, an end in mind. And, you know, and that end, I guess, is survival. I saw him on TV last night. Dawkins talking about just survival. You know, survival, I guess, is the end in itself. Things exist just to survive, period. But yet, here's a question. If I ever had Richard Dawkins in front of me, I'd like to ask him a question. You say natural selection designed all these things, okay? But I mean, natural selection itself wasn't designed or planned. I mean, where did the process of natural selection come from? It had to be a chance process. Nothing in your thinking created natural selection. It just somehow by chance arose. So I guess the fact is, you know, wouldn't anything then that arising from natural selection, which is a chance process because it arose by chance, wouldn't that naturally have to be chance as well? If the existence of natural selection, along with the mechanism of survival of the fittest, arose by chance, then wouldn't anything that arose by that necessarily be of chance as well? Of course, the whole process, despite Richard Dawkins' protestations to the contrary, the whole process is chance and chance alone. And again, I mean, if the absurdity of an onion, I mean, I looked at an onion, for crying out loud. There's an onion. And the absurdity, it just struck me, the idea of this evolving by chance alone struck me as so absurd. How much more the idea of humanity and human consciousness and human creativity and human imagination arising by chance alone. How much more absurd, beyond almost impossible that sounds. You know, it was interesting. A while back, I got a series of tapes from the teaching company. It was a fellow named Dr. Robert Hayes, and he was a PhD and taught, you know, the evolution of life. And his whole premise was that life began billions of years ago, or whatever, millions of years ago, by chance and so on. And he spent a 24 section lecture series on the origins of life. And he goes through and he starts, you know, he started out saying, I'm working from the premise that life began by chance billions of years ago, and, you know, and he goes through all these different processes by which they think life could have occurred. It could have started in the bottom of the sea. Some think it started in the depths of the earth, way down deep in the earth. It could have been, there's an ocean spray model. It could have been, you know, an ocean spray. It could have been found on the flat surface of some shale. And he goes on and on and on, and somehow explaining all these different theories. And what was funny, he'd explain a theory. Then he would spend the next 10, 15 minutes showing all the different scientists who came along and just dissed the theory, said it doesn't work, it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Then he'd get to the next theory, and he'd explain, well, maybe this works. And then he'd spend 10 minutes with the next, you know, scientist saying why this one didn't work. And then he'd do another theory, well, maybe it formed in an ocean vent, and on and on. And then he would have somebody explain why that didn't work. And it went on and on and on. Each theory come up, and then he'd explain all those who dissed it, would diss it. And yet it struck me, did it not enter this man's mind that perhaps his whole presupposition, the origin of life by chance billions of years ago, was wrong? I mean, he started out on the assumption that all life rose by chance, and then he went through bit by bit by bit different theories, and then had each theory shot down, till kind of the end of the course he sort of admits, we really don't have the vaguest idea. We really don't know how it began. And I guess I wondered, did it ever enter his mind that maybe this whole presupposition was wrong, and that none of this was working because none of this came even close to explaining life? There was an unspoken dogmatism here that I found utterly fascinating. It's like, this is the assumption we're working on, and even though none of the models work and none of the models explain it, this is the model, we know our assumption is correct, and we're going to stick with this no matter what. You know, I don't know, in my thinking, that set of tapes, more than a study of the origin of life, it was a fascinating study in epistemology and this idea of how we know what we know, how we build our understanding and our beliefs. And yet, I don't know, as I got done looking at his models and looking at that whole thing, I came away more convinced. And I don't want to be as dogmatic as he was, but it just struck me that the Genesis 1 model of creation made so much more sense, so many less different qualifications that you had to use than this idea that life began purely by chance.